as I mentioned over, yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I have been watching a few documentaries and movies over lockdown. Trying to get trying to get myself all cultured up and whatnot. And I stumbled across this documentary called B Movie Lust and Sound in West Berlin. And I kind of found it, I'm pretty sure, from 79 to 89, 1979 to 1989, directed by Mark Reeder, right? And I found it out based on an interview with somebody in the German magazine called Lola Mag.d. It's a really cool magazine, a bit hipster, kind of, focuses on all cool people in Berlin doing, cool, interesting things in art, design, fashion, all that stuff, music. And it has a really cool profiles, and it profiled this one dude who has like a record label and a little store, merch store that he puts together. He signs indie acts and new wave bands, and he puts out his own records and stuff. Really cool interview. And he mentioned, like, as throwaway during the interview itself, that he was inspired to set up his label, because of the movie, or because of the documentary Boo Movie, right? He kind of, his aesthetic is sort of like based upon that whole scene and that whole era. And then I had to thought, you know what, let me just check it out, because I've never actually seen it myself. And obviously I Googled it, and it looks amazing. It essentially kind of depicts a scene in the history of Berlin I'm not really familiar with. Of course, I'm familiar with the techno side of things from, let's say, the late 80s, or let's say early 90s onwards. I'm familiar with a lot of that. I've read up on a lot of that history. I've kind of watched a lot of those documentaries, and read up on other things in terms of interviews and all that sort of malarkey. Of course, nothing beats actually being there and living through it, but I've kind of got a good grips of it. I go there quite often myself, so I kind of understood what's kind of occurred. But there's a whole history, a whole part of the Berlin history that I didn't understand in terms of new wave. That's kind of not even part of my lexicon or stuff that I was aware of in terms of my knowledge base. And this has been such a great eye opener, especially when I then watched it just after I finished watching Deutschland 89, which is a great espionage drama that talks about the rise and fall of the Berlin Wall, secret spy agents working for West Berlin, counteracting stuff that's happening in East Berlin. That really cool TV series. There's 3 seasons. I think it's Deutschland 82, 86, and 89. I think so. Check it out. It's really good. And it's a kind of good little primer to watching this documentary. And it focuses on Mark Reeder, who for some reason, I don't know why that was a great idea at the time. It's flipping a genius idea at the time, but he decides to move from London, or move from Manchester, which again is a base of great, indie music and just bands in general, and decides to kind of find fame and fortune out in Berlin. And this is during a time where, there's no internet. He's probably going to have to learn to speak German, because I imagine it's not as multicultural as it is now, as it was back then. Maybe, I don't know. I'm just speaking out of turn here. I don't really have that much knowledge of that time in history. But he decides to go out there, and he, for some reason, has the wherewithal to film all this stuff that he's doing at the time. He catalogs it. I guess a lot of it has to do with the fact that he was working for a TV program, I think, and he got profiled a few times, and he obviously is quite media friendly himself, but he puts together all this great archive footage that basically traverses and tells his entire history and story from the time that he left Manchester and moved to Berlin, and sort of kind of shows you an entirely different perspective and view of what that city was like when the wall was up, and also when the wall fell, but also a city prior to the boom in dance music, to the boom in electronic music, to the boom in DJ culture. Like, it just shows you a completely entirely different part of Berlin that you're probably not that aware of. And I really recommend that you guys check it out. It's really great, like really, really good. One of my easily a really good wanderlust. It maybe is a bit hard to watch now because you're in lockdown. It kind of wants you to, well, makes you want to go out and just travel and discover things again. But it definitely does reawaken that desire for me to kind of document stuff, report on things. I used to do loads of vlogs and stuff, and reviews, scene reports, all this sort of thing, because a lot of it can be annoying now. People always having a camera and sort of like shoving in your face and asking your view on things, but just the actual act of documenting, like I think even Gary Vee says a lot of it, right? If you can't actually create a new idea or whatever it may be, just document what you're doing. Just kind of explain, record your day to day, because it might seem insignificant now, but as time goes on, as you kind of grow into being a different person, other opportunities come your way. That footage, when you look back on it, will be kind of would be something that you look back on and really thank yourself for recording. So let's play a little bit of the trailer now. This is B Movie Lust and Sound in West Berlin, 1979 to 1980, a documentary by Mark Reeder. Let's play a bit of it now.
Sie empfangen den Berliner Rundfunk mit Nachrichten. Eine Ehrenparade der Nationalen Volksarmee leitete am Vormittag in Berlin den 32. Jahrestag der Deutschen Demokratischen Republik ein. Stürmische Beifall und Hochrufe galten dem Generalsekretär des ZK der SED und Vorsitzenden des Staatsrates der DDR, Erich Honecker, und weiteren Mitgliedern der Partei und Staats...
During the 80s, West Berlin was a city in a state of emergency. A creative melting pot for sub and pop culture, masterminding amateurs and potential global superstars. West Berlin was unpredictable. My name is Mark Reeder, and I am from Manchester. At the end of the 70s, I was stranded in Berlin. And what I would experience over the next 10 years in West Berlin, I have documented in this film.
Just come along with me and we'll go and have a look at the city. Paint the town red. That's what it's all about.
Before the Iron Curtain fell, Berlin was a walled-in island, full of artists, hedonists and squatters, all living on the edge of life. It was never about long-term success. It was about living for the moment and the thrill, the here and now. West Berlin was the place to be. The days were short and the nights were long, endlessly long. Nick Cave once hit the nail on the head. In Berlin, there are the most beautiful women, the best drugs, and a lot of people who give the artists the respect they deserve. But this place will never be the same again. It no longer exists. In this film, I will take you on my own personal journey through the wild West Berlin of the 1980s.
The stars come down. You need a drug to make you shine. You need the pills to take you home.
But honestly, it is marvelous. Easily one of the best documentaries I've watched in recent years. So good, and it really kind of it's sort of you kind of understand why a lot of people talk so glowingly and have such fond memories of how Berlin was in the past, years gone by, maybe let's say late 90s, early 2000s, and they say why it's not the same anymore. Because when you see what it was when it first sort of like erupted as this cultural hub, especially parts of West Berlin, right, before the wall fell down, after the wall fell down, you sort of get to see like, wow, man, just imagine how it was, like how freeing it must have been to just decide to set up a sound system in an abandoned building somewhere, throw some of the most amazing raves with no restrictions, formulate an entire scene, give opportunities to people that go on to be some of the most biggest cultural definers and noisemakers and cultural shifters in the scene at the moment. You give them an opportunity to sort of play this rave. You don't really know anything at the time, you're just doing it for the love, and you kind of cultivate this entire thing that goes on to being your life's work. It goes on to being something that kind of support you and your family for years on end, right? Most of those people have kind of decided, for various parts of the reason, to kind of venture off and do other things within the scene still, even if they're not in front of the decks or in this club themselves, they're still attached to it. So a whole ecosystem, a whole industry was born off of that time, and we're still enjoying the fruits of it now, even nowadays. But it's not the same, and you get to see why it's not the same. And imagine we're still seeing this sort of like fifth, third hand, right? This has been edited down. This stuff that's archive footage is obviously a certain time in history through certain people's lenses. So it's still not a clear depiction of it, because you can never really experience anything until you're actually there. But it definitely gives you an idea of like, oh, this is why people keep talking about the past so much. This is why they keep talking about how great it was back then when, rents were like, I don't know, 400 euros for a massive 3-bed apartment somewhere. It's really great. I do kind of relate a lot to the Nick Cave. In the documentary, it features him, a young Nick Cave. Mark Reeder meets him out there. I think Nick Cave meets Mark Reeder out there. He sort of wants to go and find himself again creatively, sort of similar to what Iggy Pop and Dave David Bowie did back in the day too, and they sort of link up. They decide to go out. He formulates a new band. It breaks up and whatever it may be. But he did what I kind of done right with it, where I've kind of dipped and dabbed, sort of dipped my toe in it for a few times, but then gone out because I've known, it probably isn't the place for me to live day in day out, because I'll probably eventually get lost in the source. But he definitely had a good understanding of its power in terms of it being a generator, a place to go to sort of like culturally awaken yourself, because people don't really, it's sort of like an adult playground. It sort of reminds me of like a cultural version of what Florida is to like, pasty white people in America, where they kind of go there just to kind of as an excuse to just lay around and not do much. Same kind of a thing occurs over there, but you just get the opportunity to sort of, explore all your niche interests that you probably couldn't get away with having it be your living in other parts of Europe, right? You couldn't probably get away with being a chiropractor or, a plant healer or a masseuse or a yoga teacher or whatever. You have to sort of get back into reality. And that's a great thing about it. Like, reality is just an illusion, right? There is no such thing as reality when you live in those kind of places, especially in that time. It's just whatever you decide to make it to be. It's exactly what your reality is. And I think Nick Cave understood that and sort of was able to kind of dip in and dip out of it. And it's a really good primer to sort of like show you, maybe a reminder, maybe not, subcultures aren't the same as they were in the past, don't get me wrong, but they do still exist. And there is still a desire and a requirement, if you're trying to get involved and you're trying to be a part of it, to really get involved and be a part of it. Set up a band, get involved in the band, put on parties, set up a crappy label, whatever it may be. Like, take part, really involve yourself with these sort of things, because culturally, and just in terms of the artistic timeline of wherever you're from, and you just your own history as well, you never know how much impact and what significance the tiny thing that you do will have to the entire timeline of things going forward. And you just look back on it 5 years later, 10 years later, you're like, rotted, look at that small thing that I did that led me to go to all these different places, meet all these different people, that eventually led you to an entirely different career. But you never know if you would have got there without those kind of formative years of sort of just figuring stuff out with your friends. It's just one of the coolest things to see, people just figuring it out. You're seeing a lot of it now at the moment with these sort of like weird magazine zine things that people are doing in New York, where they're sort of kind of taking it back to that sort of like pre-blogging era where people were putting out zines and whatnot it may be. And it's great. You want people to participate with these things a bit more. And I'm hoping in the post-lockdown world, people are maybe like thinking, hey, as great as this digital world is that we're sort of existing in at the moment, as great as all these sort of new technologies that exist, nothing really beats human connection. Nothing really beats being around people, right? And sort of cultivating a scene, cultivating your personality, a friendship group, your interests, your wants, your desires, right? In real time, nothing really beats that. And the only way you can do it is by actively taking part in things and really committing yourself to being a part of it and trying your best to sort of ingrain yourself in it, and not just criticizing from afar, pointing fingers, telling people what they're doing wrong or right. No, put some skin in the game yourself and get involved. And this documentary is definitely a great reminder of it. Honestly, really really good, man. I really recommend you check it out. B movie, Lust and Sound in West Berlin, 1979 to 1989 by Mark Reeder. You can find it in loads of places. Obviously, if you're smart enough, you'll figure it out. But definitely check it out. It's definitely highly recommended.